Let's presume again now that the clerk had in fact shot the purported armed robber. Would that have been lawful if he believed the gun to be real? Well, let's take a look at the deadly force statute for Florida. Make it a little, make it a little bigger. This is Florida statute 776012. It's their general self-defense statute. A person is justified in using or threatening. So Florida combines the two, similar conditions, right? The California jury instruction was for killing or not killing. Didn't really address threatening. But Florida, and by the way, this was an update to Florida law in recent years. The addition of the threatening language to the statute. It also used to refer only to using. And prosecutors were actually trying to argue with a straight face the ridiculous argument that it would have been legal for a defender to use deadly force and kill someone, but it was not legal for them to merely threaten deadly force and not kill them. So you would have been privileged in killing, and instead, because you chose mercy, what would have been lawful becomes a crime. That's why the legislature added in this threatening language. So a person is justified in using or threatening to use deadly force if they reasonably believe that using or threatening to use deadly force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself. Now, under that standard, the clerk would not be justified even under this Florida statute, right? Because he didn't believe he was facing imminent death or great bodily harm. But Florida allows for the use of deadly defensive force under an alternative scenario, besides reasonably perceiving a threat of imminent death or great bodily harm. And that is, or to prevent the imminent commission of a forcible felony. Well, that's interesting. So if we have a forcible felony taking place, that's an independent justification for the use of deadly defensive force that doesn't require a reasonable perception of imminent death or great bodily harm. Well, what are the forcible felonies under Florida law? Well, fortunately, Florida tells us. Forcible felony means treason, murder, manslaughter, sexual battery, carjacking, home invasion robbery, burglary, arson, kidnapping, aggravated assault, etc., etc., etc. Robbery is a forcible felony under Florida law that would privilege you to use deadly defensive force without requiring that you had a reasonable perception of death or serious bodily injury. Now, do we have a robbery here? If robbery is the combination of larceny and assault, as theoretically it is, academically it is, and the clerk doesn't see the assault, is it a robbery? It's an attempted robbery. It failed, but it's an attempt. But this doesn't say attempted robbery. None of these are described as attempt crimes. And as I said, you can reasonably treat the actual commission of a crime and the attempt to commit that crime as the same, right? Morally, ethically, legally. But often states don't. Often states treat them differently. They have a different punishment for the committed crime, the completed crime, than they do for the attempted crime. So the attempt and the crime are not always treated the same way. Would an attempted robbery qualify under forcible felony here? And again, I don't have an absolute answer. I'd want to talk to like Steve Gosney on this. And even he would probably have to do some research. Although he might know off the top of his head just from his personal experience doing criminal defense in Florida, might have run across cases like this. I didn't have time to dig that deep into the research before the show, but let's take a look at the definition of robbery under Florida law. Robbery means the taking of money or other property, which may be the subject of larceny, from the person or custody of another with intent to permanently, temporarily deprive the person of the property, when in the course of the taking, there is the use of force, violence, assault, or putting in fear. So here we have we say robbery, academically speaking, is a combination of larceny and assault. Here we have the larceny, and here we have the assault. Right? Pretty straightforward definition of robbery, but not of attempt. not of attempted robbery. So let's scroll down the statute here and see if we see anything. Well, look at this. An act shall be deemed in the course of committing the robbery if it occurs in an attempt to commit robbery or in flight after the attempt or commission. Well, this would suggest to me that Florida folds attempt in to the forcible attempted robbery into the forcible felony definition of robbery itself and doesn't distinguish for forcible felony purposes. And that really only kind of makes sense, right? Because if the Florida legislature is going to say, hey, you can kill someone lawfully in the context of a forcible felony to prevent the commission of a forcible felony. Well, if you're successful in your defense, the robbery is not completed. It's not a completed crime. You neutralized the robbery. You prevented it from being completed by your use of deadly defensive force. So all it ever was an attempt. In fact, this provision that allows for the use of deadly force to prevent a forcible felony only makes sense if we're hoping all of these forcible felonies will fail at the attempt stage because of the privilege to use deadly defensive force. That's rather the point. We don't want the kidnapping to happen or the aggravated assault to happen or the home invasion robbery to happen or the straight up robbery to happen. And we're allowing you to use deadly defensive force to prevent it from being completed. So I don't see how reasonably you can treat any of these as being anything other than applying to the attempt versions of each of these offenses.